knowing that your Annie, your daughter, was going to pass away, how did you and your family plan for her end of life? Did you have the opportunity for pediatric hospice?
We got connected with a pretty robust children's hospital in Oregon, and they had a pediatric palliative care. When it came time, when we knew that she was getting close to death because she had spent 2 different times in the pediatric ICU at some hospitals, and we knew that likely the next respiratory illness would require either an intervention that we weren't willing to do. It was exactly how I wanted it to be. I was holding her. All of us were in that room together, holding that space with her when she took her last breath. And it was the most transformative experience of my life, for sure.
And just to hold on to that image. Welcome to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. If you ever asked, how do I protect myself and those I love if something unexpected happened to me? You're in the right place. I'm your host, Niki Weiss, and together we'll explore how to protect yourself in a world where both your physical and digital legacy leave a lasting impact. And welcome back to another episode of the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. My guest today is Morgan. Morgan, we are connected through LinkedIn. There's a growing community about this death and dying space, not just with grief, but how grief and technology actually intersect. So thank you so much for accepting my invitation to be here today.
I'm so happy to talk with you today. Thanks, Niki.
Just one of those amazing human beings that just, wears your heart on your sleeve and is ready to talk about this taboo topic because you have a personal story. So what got you here today?
Oh, well, I suppose I could go back to the day that I received a phone call that my daughter's blood test came back with negative results, in the sense that she was diagnosed with a rare genetic illness. She was 3.5, and we were told at that first appointment that her life expectancy was mid-teens. So as you can imagine, our world was completely upended. Everything came to a halt as we try to wrap our heads around the knowledge that over the coming decade that we would watch our child, who was full of life, full of spunk, walking, talking, running, eating, saying the colors in the alphabet and having conversations, that over time we would watch her lose all of those skills. And she passed away in 2022 at the age of 14. And I would say that a big chunk of why I'm doing what I'm doing now is because I had some pretty scary and significant mental health issues that popped up for myself that I had zero tools to know how to manage at all. So I started having panic attacks and severe anxiety, intrusive thoughts, and I know that medical PTSD, especially in the context of having your child in a medical situation, is, I don't know that that's actually clinically diagnosable, but I would say that there's a lot of trauma wrapped up in caring for my child, being in hospital settings where we're doing things that I know are symptom management, but can't do anything to slow down this absolute train of a degenerative disease. So that's where what I'm doing currently ties in with my personal story of grief and loss.
I mean, your family went on a journey. So for 10 years that you, how do you live fully knowing that at some point you're trying to beat the odds, doctor's appointments, and you had other children as well.
Yeah, so we have 3 kids, and it's really interesting that you said that we were trying to beat the odds, because when we got her diagnosis, they told us that, and this wasn't completely accurate, but because it was a rare disease, there wasn't a real robust knowledge of what treatments were like. And so the only type of treatment really for this type of disease is, and I won't get too in the weeds on this, but is enzyme replacement therapy or a gene therapy. And when we got her diagnosis, that was still really in the dark ages. So they told us there really is no chance of a cure for her. So we weren't really trying to beat the odds. Right away, we had a mentality of how do we make our child's life full of meaning, full of love, full of connection, and along the way trying to figure out how to just grapple with the acceptance of the inevitability of her death.
I mean, I just got the chills. And the reason I say that is because as a parent of a young child, you're having to face this inevitable end stage of life. And it's incredible how people, I was out to dinner last night with a table, 10 people who were in their 70s, and they didn't want to talk about it. And so the inevitability of having to look at as your child and going through this.
Yeah, I think, it's so normal for us to not want to look at this. If we,
No matter what
if
age you
we
are.
were thinking, yes, it's so normal to not want to talk about this, to pretend that it's going to happen to somebody else, but it's not going to happen to me. And there's something really protective about the way that our brains work. Because if we were obsessed with our own mortality all the time, we would never do anything. We would never drive a car. We would never cross the street. We would never, we would never eat anything because we'd be afraid of choking. Our bodies are so fragile in so many ways. And the more that I learn, even just the neuroscience of how our brains function and all the things that they connect to and control, I am amazed that any of us are doing the things that we're doing because there are so many systems that rely on each other. And so it's perfectly normal and perfectly reasonable for us to be like, I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to face this. However, I think that the beautiful thing about looking these issues full in the face is that and maybe in like a boundaried way, in a safe container of being able to look at our mortality, it brings so much clarity to the things that we're doing in our lives. And I think that's the piece that people miss out on when they systematically and consistently refuse to look at our own mortality, is that we miss out on the clarifying aspect of it all. And that's one of the things with Annie is, knowing that this inevitability was looming on the horizon. We couldn't do anything to stop it. It brought so much clarity to how we wanted to structure her education, how we wanted to spend time together as a family. All of these things that in society we're told, this is what it means to be successful. This is how the trajectory that your children are supposed to have to go through grade school and make sure they get good grades and be on these sports teams and get the trophies or be part of these clubs or whatever. And none of those things are bad, but we often will do those things without any conscious intention and awareness that we get a choice to choose whether or not to participate in those things. And so Annie's short life made it so clear to me that the levels of autonomy and choice that we have, not just for her, but for myself as well. Like, what things am I choosing to spend my time watching? What things am I choosing to spend my time reading? What relationships am I choosing to invest in? And it's such a clarifying thing. And I had the privilege of having this little person in my company all the time that was a very practical and present reminder of the finiteness of life and the preciousness of all the moments.
I just want to say, I don't know if you can see the book behind me, but it's called Everyone Dies. It's the children's version. A good friend of mine, Marianne Motso, PhD, wrote this book because we don't talk about this with our children. We, for whatever reason, this taboo topic, and you and I will lean hard into this, like, we need to break this taboo topic. Both of us are on a mission. So let me ask you, so at what age, and as a parent, how, she's 3.5, she still believes in Santa, like, we're just getting them in. I mean, my granddaughter's 3 years old, so it's like I'm teaching them about Santa Claus, and here you're teaching them about, so as a parent, how did that journey go to bring this inevitable aspect of life, which, by the way, I just want to state that death is indiscriminate. It doesn't care how old you are. It doesn't care your socioeconomic, your education, your health, right? I mean, people want to talk about death as like the final stages of life, but there are some people that never get there. That pediatric hospice. I mean, so let me just take a pause. So my first question was, as a parent, how do you, how old was Annie when you started to bring this into her preview?
The the disease, the way that the disease affected her body and brain is similar to what you might see in an adult Alzheimer's patient. So there's degenerative brain disease happening in addition to a breakdown in the body systems. So even though Annie was 3.5 and probably was still on track cognitively through maybe when she was about 5, as she started to lose skills, it wasn't something like ALS, for example, where the body breaks down but the mind is still completely there and clear. So for her, as her body was breaking down, her brain was also breaking down. So communication was lost. So there wasn't so much the pressure to be able to be talking with a child about their own mortality, like you would see perhaps in a pediatric cancer patient.
But you had other children.
So for Annie,
you had other children.
Yes. So we have 2 other children that are younger, and it was really something that my husband and I wrestled with, to know how much to tell them ahead of time, because it was like, do we tell them that their sister's going to die and worry about them holding on to the weight of that for years, and also living in the same kind of thing that we were, where it was this hypervigilance almost, as we anticipated, when is that going to happen, always on the lookout for when is that going to happen. And so do we tell them to prepare them, or do we not tell them but then have them be surprised? And so it was really really tricky to know how to navigate that with them. And we just kind of trusted that along the way we would understand developmentally what things they were able to kind of comprehend and take. And so when Annie passed away, our middle child was 11, and then our son was 6 or 7, somewhere in there. And at those ages, there is some concept of this separation caused by death, but there might be a little bit of ambiguity around the permanence of it. So we've just trusted that every conversation that we had with them was never going to be the conversation. It's not like, oh good, we've like talked to them about that thing and we don't have to address it anymore. We've had many conversations in the past 3.5 years or 3 years since her death, as we've continued to wrestle with these big topics, these like existential questions that all of us kind of deal with when it comes to our mortality. And
preparation, which is, I mean, your family was prepared when the time came. It sounds like a lot of quality time together. And from a digital standpoint, were you able to create a legacy for her that you can now hold on to and look back on?
Yeah,
I mean, your podcast is probably ways, this. I mean, even just this conversation, right? I know that you're out there sharing your story, but digitally speaking, for Annie.
Yeah, well, for Annie specifically, I'm very grateful that we have so many photos and videos of her, because it was a progressive disease. Videos where I got to hear her saying things were much longer ago. But I still have videos of her giggling and laughing and even crying. And I knew, because I knew that at some point she was going to die, I started taking pictures of her in ways that I knew I would never share, because I knew that no one else would care about that particular angle the same way that I did. So for example, she had this cute little dimple in her ear that is actually like weirdly something that can happen in a lot of kids. There's like some genetic component to it, but she had this like cute little dimple in her ear, and I took a close-up picture of that. No one else would ever, like, they wouldn't frame that photo, they wouldn't care, but to me it was all of these very intimate, close pictures of her that I had in real life, you know, as I would hold her, I would be that close to that little dimple in her ear. And so that's the photo that I took. So I have hundreds of photos like that where it's photos that are meaningful to me because we were physically so close to each other.
And then once her passing happened, I mean, what got you to the space where you're now, supporting families, individuals, and going through this is it a transformation? How do you describe your guidance that you're providing people? I mean, you don't call yourself a thanatologist, though, right?
No. I think that the impetus to try to help other people who maybe are going through something similar came twofold, partly as a way to say, hey, here's ways that I didn't know to take care of my mental health that I wish I would have. And so I will share now with you the tools that have helped me, you know, in the moments of having a panic attack. Here are some like really practical 1, 2, 3 things that you can do. Here's what self-care actually is. It's not bubble bath and getting a pedicure, but it's, you know, all these other things. Here's the tool of mindfulness and meditation that has dramatically improved my ability to be present with what is. So some of that started before she passed, but after her diagnosis, because I was just felt such a longing to meet other people in those spaces that I had been in and currently was in, dealing with things like anticipatory grief, knowing that at some point she's going to die. So that was part of it, was just wanting to share what I had learned. And part of it also was just incredibly therapeutic, in the same way that someone might write a not a biography, a memoir, that's what I'm looking for, where they find the process of remembering what their life was like to be such a profoundly therapeutic process. That's also what this feels like to me. So being able to record a podcast shortly after she died and being able to say kind of what some of those moments were like while she was actively dying was not only really therapeutic, but I'm so grateful that I have that as like a journal of sorts, to be able to look back and be like, oh, this is what I went through, and this is how I processed it, and this is how I think about it now. The reflection piece is really important as well.
I mean, Morgan, you went through what is probably a parent's worst nightmare. And that here you are now. How long ago has it been since she passed?
December 4th was the 3-year anniversary.
So here we are, 2026, right? And yet you're inspiring, you're empowering, you're educating people that even the worst possible experience, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What's the end of that sentence there?
I will say that one thing that is kind of unique about the circumstance with Annie is that I had a really long runway to anticipate the inevitability of her death. So for a parent who loses a child in some type of tragic accident, or, you know, death by suicide, a parent who receives a diagnosis and then it's a very quick progression of the disease and their death, or parents who have a disease that is treatable and potentially curable, that's a very different type of psychological experience than it is for me. So even within the realm of a parent losing a child, there's so much variability in there. And there's a lot of variability even in the systems and supports and what else is happening alongside of the reality of losing a child. So I forgot what your original question was, but that's something that came to mind with that.
But you made a distinction. I mean, we all have our own personal experiences, right? So going through this losing a child experience, even that has multiple branches of what a person would go through. I mean, it really is,
Yes.
I mean, the uniqueness of it. And I mean, I have to take a moment. You and I really didn't have a personal conversation, but I don't know if you know, but my son-in-law, who's 34, is going through terminal brain cancer right now. And it's a moment for pause. And at the same time, people ask me, how's your daughter doing? And it's interesting because she is actually doing a lot of those coping skills that you talked about. The mindfulness, she does take time for herself. She actually mucks horses' stalls. She finds that very therapeutic, so she takes time out for caring for her husband to be outside and doing physical things. But it's just a very personal experience. But I believe that because she's using these tools that you guide people through, it's allowing her to embrace the experience instead of running away from it or avoiding it or being in fear of it or overwhelmed.
One thing that I definitely have come to realize is that it's grief is not an either or. So to say, to be able to say, like, I have these tools that help me cope and be present in the moments. That doesn't mean that all the moments then are like that. Like, there's definitely, things that I do where I numb out and I avoid it, all these things. And so it's a really funny thing that we do where we're like, either I'm grieving the right way or I'm grieving the wrong way. And that's one of the things that has fascinated me so much about what I'm currently studying. So I'm in school right now as at the time of this recording, I'm getting my Bachelor of Science in Psychology and Neuroscience. And I'm really interested in how grief impacts the brain. Because one of the things that I found is that understanding how the squishy organ in this hard case, understanding how this works and how our brain makes connections between certain things and why memories pop up when they do, and why does this smell trigger a memory from my childhood in a way that touching something or seeing something doesn't. Like, all of this stuff that I'm learning about neuroscience, I'm really interested in how our brains deal with things like grief, and learning about how our brains function around things like death, I think is so fascinating. Because one of the jobs of our brain, one of the big jobs that our brain has, is to make predictions. And it's constantly updating based on if there are any errors in our prediction. So, for example, when someone dies, you might hear a sound and you think, that's my person. So when Annie died, she used to have seizures at nighttime. And after she died, I would hear a thunk in the night and I would wake up in this like fight or flight, because my neural wiring said that sound might be Annie having a seizure. And it took months and months for my brain to catch up to the reality that couldn't possibly be her. So grief has some really, really solid biological reasons why we respond the way that we do to certain things. And having some understanding of that has helped me be so compassionate toward myself and so empathetic towards other people who are going through unimaginable things, because there's a lot of stuff that we blame on either a lack of self-control or a lack of knowledge or a lack of supports that has real biological reasons why we do things the way that we do. So having real compassion for ourselves that say, hey, today I can sit in mindfulness for 45 minutes or whatever, but tomorrow I can't. And there's reasons for that. Like, there's hormonal reasons, or there's things that are happening in my life that can make these things difficult from day to day. So to have so much compassion and tenderness for ourselves as we navigate grief and loss and uncertainty the best that we can, I think is one of the most skills that we can develop as humans. One of the most important skills we can develop.
So I'm going to ask a very unique perspective, because one, you are a parent who lost a child, and you are now professionally or academically stepping into this psychoneuroimmunology, right? So if people aren't familiar with that study, but psychoneuroimmunology is how your physical body, your feelings, your thoughts affect your physical body. So the neuroplasticity, and for people that don't know, your brain is actually made of lipoprotein. That's why you need to eat a lot of protein in order for full functionality of your brain. I mean, so to take those two perspectives, and now let's add technology in the middle. So as a parent who lost a child, and as an academician who is now exploring our emotions and that psychoneuroimmunological response, GriefBot, your thoughts on it?
I don't know what GriefBot is.
So well, then let's take an educational opportunity here. So GriefBot is new technology that multiple platforms are actually being launched as we speak, where they could possibly take all of the digital assets that you have of your daughter, your video, your phones, and they put it into an AI platform. Did you ever see the movie Black Mirror, television show Black Mirror?
No, I haven't.
On your list. So for those that have, so basically technology has reached a point today where there can be a likeness of your daughter on the screen, where you can actually interact with your child. So actually, let me take the perspective. So you're not familiar with this technology that's out there. They're called grief bots, where people can actually talk to an AI bot, an AI agent, and that will actually replicate the person's persona. So my question is, as a parent, how would you feel about that? Like, to keep not just the picture of your daughter or the video of your daughter, but to be able to open up your computer screen and be able to speak to her as though she was here.
Oh, I have lots of feelings about it.
Oh, let's go raw.
I know enough about how bias impacts our ability to think about things, especially if they're new things, to know that my initial reaction of like, ugh, like I don't like that. That sounds really bad. I don't want to just sit in that and be like, okay, therefore I'm not going to think about this. But the couple ways that I think about this, one is that any interactions that I have with this bot are not interactions with that person. So it feels like it can get really muddy really quickly when it comes to being able to recall real memories. So there are some interesting studies about using devices when it comes to how that impacts our ability to remember things. In that, they found that using electronic devices can impair our ability to remember the event. So I mean, some of the most basic research I can think of is that we've seen that in London cab drivers, for example, is they have a larger hippocampus than normal average humans, because the hippocampus is really important for memory, and they have a really robust grasp on the London street systems.
And just to pause for people that know, the hippocampus is part of the brain. So some people might not be familiar with that term.
Yes. So, different structures in the brain primarily have different jobs, but everything is so interconnected. Sometimes it's a little bit of a misnomer to be like, this thing is in charge of memory. It's all connected, but I do think it's really interesting to see real changes in the brain structure based on the activities that we choose to engage in. So something else what I said about...
So the cab driver.
Sorry.
The cab driver.
Yes. Yep. So the cab drivers who have a larger hippocampus, because they actually have to remember things in their brain instead of relying on something like GPS. That's the point that I was trying to make. So sometimes I wonder if I have really, really practically and personally, sometimes I wonder if I have a memory of the event or if I have a memory of the photo or video that I took of the event. Like it's like when you go to the beach and you see a lot of people standing out there with their phones, and they're not actually watching the sunset, they're watching the sunset on their phone, and there's this, it's like a layer of disconnection between us and reality. And so one of the things that I think I would be worried about with something like a grief bot is that it doesn't allow us to stay connected with what is. It only keeps us connected to what we wish would be, in the sense of, Annie's not here. I'm not ever going to be able to talk with her again. And if there was a grief bot that was interacting with me as as her 14-year-old, I still wouldn't be able to talk to her because she wasn't speaking at 14 years old. So I think the impact on our memories and not being able to differentiate between an actual memory and a fake memory I think sounds really complicated, and I don't. Yeah, I think I'll stick with my kind of like initial knee-jerk reaction. It doesn't feel to me like it's something that connects us more to our humanness and our humanity. It feels like another way to avoid what is by living in a world of what we wish would still be.
Well, now that I've introduced you to the concept of a grief bot, I mean, I'm sure that it's going to start coming up because people are leaning into technology in order to stay connected to those that have passed, or even just to deal, with like from a therapeutic standpoint, to be able to talk to about your grief if they don't have the financial means or be able to connect with a live person to be able to talk about what they're going through. And at the same time, technology, it's a double-edged sword for sure. And at the same time, trying to find that balance between, look, you and I are talking, we're creating a digital asset right now. I mean, we've connected through a digital platform on LinkedIn, and you're going to talk more about some of the services that you provided. So we don't want to disregard the technology, and yet the technology could be bridging us between the physical world that we're living here and that where do we go after we die space, right? It could actually be the bridge between the two.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that the tool can always be used in a way that is harmful. And just because it's a tool doesn't mean inherently that it's bad. And I actually do think that some of the developments in AI and the way that some of these AI models are being trained by therapists, by coaches, I think is really interesting. And I have used some AI programs to be able to almost like have the jumble of thoughts come out and be like, hey, can you synthesize this for me? It has been a really important tool in developing some more objectivity in my relationships. So in that sense, I think that this could be a really interesting tool. What I feel like I have the knee-jerk reaction to that feels yucky is using these tools to recreate the person that you have lost. That's what I feel like is not going to actually be a healthy way for us to integrate the reality of the loss into our lives now. And that's what I think, a lot of grief therapists, and one of the things that has helped me the most in my life is learning how to be in a state of acceptance for what is. That's a really important part of being able to develop resilience and being able to not view grief and death and loss as the end of vitality, as the end of joy. I've had people who have asked me, like, you've lost a child, like basically wondering, like, how could I still possibly have a good day? And it's because I've learned that grief is never ever one thing. Losing a child isn't all bad. There are moments of deep clarity, and there are moments of profound joy and connection. Even in the moments of her actively dying, there were moments of laughter, like that type of complexity is part of what being human is. And the goal, I think, of becoming more human is to learn how to be with all of those things. And so if we're using technology as a way to avoid any part of being human that feels uncomfortable, I think we do ourselves a real disservice.
I learned the term recently, human equity. And I think that that's a term now that we're moving into this, that we're in the fourth industrial revolution, where technology is starting to play a greater role in it's not just the background anymore, it's becoming more the forefront.
Yes.
That human equity is really something that we're going to need to start taking account of. And I think there's nothing more human than death and the dying process. And I mean, your family has certainly been through it. Probably for you, I know for my daughter, when people say, how is she doing? And I say that it's a defining moment in her life. And it sounds like for you too, that you're now offering people support because of the experience you've been through. So as we just start closing out this conversation, which has been amazing, my gift to you is check out Black Mirror episode. I'll send you the link where they actually start to bring back a beloved one. And then for people who want to get, well, let's start with lessons, takeaways. What are some takeaways people can think about in working with you?
Well, I will say that, I'm not a coach. I am not already educationally and in academia. I am not moving in the direction of becoming a clinical psychologist. So there's not really any way to work with me one-on-one. I will say the few things that I do offer and would be takeaways from this is the importance of developing a mindfulness practice. And I know I've already kind of banged on about that a little bit in this interview, that learning how to be present right now with everything that you're feeling, with the discomfort, with the sadness, with the anger, learning how to live a real embodied presence in your life is really, really important. And so what you can do to learn how to develop that skill, anything that you can do to develop that skill, I think is a worthwhile investment of your time and energy, whether that's meditation or some type of mindfulness course, or, there's even classes that you can take on like mindful cooking or mindful eating or mindful walking, so it's not just about sitting on a meditation pillow and trying not to think about anything. It's really developing the skill to not live a life of constant distraction from what's currently happening in this moment in my external and internal world. So that would be number one takeaway. Number two takeaway is, I touched on this for just a second, but the importance of self-care, that really is about knowing yourself, knowing what you need, knowing what you want, and being able to communicate that in healthy ways to people that can support you in that. So whether that's, finding a good therapist, or if you're an introvert, taking time away from, even the people that you love the most. There were many times when I would take time away from Annie, and I would really wrestle with the guilt of that, because I knew how short her time was, but I also knew that in order to be well myself, like, I really needed that time away from that caregiving role. So finding practices that just help you really become recharged, re-energized, fill your own cup, find the places in your life where the energy and vitality are leaking out, and find ways to, stop those up. So I think those are my two big takeaways for your listeners today.
Maybe if we have to take care of ourselves if we're to take care of everybody else. And
Yes.
I think that that's really the message is the caregiving piece is that you were on the long run. It was a long run for you, 10 years.
Yes.
And the only way you probably got through that is because you took those moments of self-care in with everything else that came with it in the family.
Yes.
Well, listen, if people wanted to reach out to you and engage with you, best place for them to find you.
Well, I guess if you don't mind, I'll put a little plug in for some of the
Please.
things. I have my own podcast. It's called PS We Expire. The episodes are not primarily about death and dying. Some of them are, but it's really an exploration of what true living means. So there's a lot of different topics that I myself cover, and then also have guests who come in and talk about their stuff. So there's my PS We Expire podcast. On my website, I have a resource vault that it's completely free, but they're tools that I have either created or used over the years. I think I have like 10 or 11 in there. Some of them are, like a meditation course, an introduction to meditate. I almost said medication, introduction to medication. Introduction to meditation is called for people who are even reluctant to like kind of dip their toe in that water. So in introduction to meditation, I have some journal prompts in there. I have a mortality mindfulness. So it's like a visualization about contemplating your own mortality and taking notes on how that affects what you think about is happening in your life right now. So there's my resource vault. And then the two things that are paid, I have a couple of conversation decks. That one is before you go, conversation starters for a good death. So there's, I don't know, 50 50, 60 questions in there that are really helpful in being able to broach these conversations with the people you love. Because I think a lot of times, like, we want to talk about these things, but we don't really know how. We don't have the language for it. It just feels kind of awkward. So this is a good way to do that. And then my other deck is After They're Gone, and it's conversation starters for healthy grieving. So how do we want to move through grief and remember the people that we've lost? And then the last thing, I created a resource called the 2 a.m. Caregiver Toolkit. So it's a really robust product, I guess I should say, but it includes mindfulness audios that are tailored to parents who have been in the same position that I have. It's not just for parents, but anybody who's in a caregiver role. There's a workbook in there that teaches some of these techniques for things like, if you're feeling overwhelmed and you can't stop the racing thoughts, like, practically, what can I do? I need tools that are based and grounded in science and therapeutic interventions that actually work. So all those things are available on my website. I hang out on Instagram the most, at Morgan_Motsinger, I think, but I'm on YouTube and LinkedIn and all the places I'm supposed to be.
We'll have those all.
Thank you, Niki.
Thank you so much for joining me today. It was just, and your story is moving, and I appreciate your engagement. And we can end here.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you for listening to the Digital Legacy Podcast, where we talk about death and dying in the digital age. I hope this conversation inspired you to take control and plan for the inevitable to protect yourself and those you leave behind. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter at digitallegacypodcast.com. Remember, life is full of surprises. What happens after you die shouldn't be. So keep your passwords safe and your playbook up to date.